Have you ever met someone who seems to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders? In a quiet moment by the lake, Daniel encounters Rachel, a woman grappling with loss and longing for connection. Their unexpected meeting sets off a journey of healing and discovery that neither could have anticipated. What unfolds between them is a tale of resilience, vulnerability, and the power of simply being present. Stick around to dive deeper into their story, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm 22 years old and reside in a quaint town just outside of Lexington. During the day, I work at a local car wash and attend night classes in automotive technology at the community college. It may not be glamorous, but it's honest work. I appreciate simple pleasures, black coffee, early morning jogs, and restoring old items to make them functional again. Most days, I'm content with the tranquility of my life. However, there are moments and people that unexpectedly arrive and alter everything. It all began on a Thursday afternoon when the sky was overcast, as if it couldn't decide whether to rain. I had just completed my shift and was taking my dog Tucker for a walk by the lake in my neighborhood. It's not much, just a small park with a gravel path and some benches overlooking the water. Usually it's deserted, which is why I noticed her immediately. She was perched on one of the old wooden benches, gazing out at the lake as if it held answers to unasked questions. Her blonde hair was tied up in a messy bun, she wore a loose sweater draped off one shoulder, and her jeans were rolled up at the ankles. She wasn't crying, but there was something weighty about her stillness, like she was made of stone. Tucker, being his overly friendly self, tugged on his leash and approached her directly. I started to apologize. Sorry, he loves people and doesn't understand boundaries. She turned to me slowly. Her eyes were distant yet kind, exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't remedy. It's okay, she replied softly, as if she hadn't spoken in quite some time. She reached out to scratch behind Tucker's ears. He's sweet. Not knowing what else to say, I stood there awkwardly. Beautiful evening, I suggested. She offered me a half smile and asked, You think so? Yeah, the quiet is nice. She nodded once before returning her gaze to the water. I was about to continue my walk. I didn't want to intrude on her solitude, but something compelled me to stay, like she needed someone beside her even if she couldn't express it. I'm Daniel, I introduced myself. Rachel? She replied without looking up again as she continued petting Tucker. Her eyes seemed far away once more. So, I took a seat at the far end of the bench without getting too close. We sat there for about 5 minutes in silence, just the breeze rustling through leaves, gentle ripples on the water's surface, and Tucker's tail thumping softly against the ground. When she finally stood up, she looked at me as if she were about to say something, but then simply nodded politely before walking away. I watched until she vanished down the path. I didn't know who she was or what experiences had shaped her life, but something about her lingered in my mind. Perhaps it was the silence or the sadness that seemed to envelop her like a second skin, or how she gazed at the water as if it had once promised her tranquility but failed to deliver. All I knew was that I wanted to see her again. However, I didn't expect that would happen. People like her, the ones who sit quietly by lakes and then disappear without saying anything, usually fade away for good, like ghosts or chapters you're not meant to revisit. But then days later, there she was in the cereal aisle of our local grocery store, while I pushed my cart filled with 2 frozen pizzas, a bag of apples and some shampoo that I probably grabbed out of habit. There she stood in front of the oatmeal section holding a box but not really paying attention to it. Rachel again! Same distant expression and heavy aura as before. This time, though, her hair hung loose around her shoulders beneath an oversized coat that looked like it belonged to someone else. She didn't notice me initially. I almost turned my cart around because I'm not one to intrude where I'm not welcome. But then our eyes met, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile yet, but definitely not indifference either. So I took a chance. Hey, I said casually, as if we were old friends running into each other unexpectedly over cereal choices. She actually laughed softly, as if surprised by herself for doing so. I guess I'm just zoning out. I can relate, I replied. I do that in the frozen food section too. It must be those fluorescent lights combined with bad jazz music. She smiled faintly and said my name correctly. Daniel, right? Feeling oddly proud that she remembered me made me smile back. Yeah, Rachel, I confirmed with warmth as we stood surrounded by colourful cereal boxes amidst the hum of cheap store speakers. After a moment's pause, I decided to ask, Listen, I'm heading over for coffee at Mike's next door. Would you like to join? She regarded me thoughtfully for an extended moment. I could see her weighing options while gripping tighter onto the box in her hands, before finally nodding. Mike's cafe wasn't fancy, it had mismatched mugs and chipped tables, but we found a quiet booth tucked away in a corner where Rachel ordered black coffee while I opted for my usual dark roast with a splash of vanilla creamer. For some time, we simply sat together. There was no rush for conversation since she seemed like someone who needed silence more than words. Eventually, though, she broke it. Do you always talk to women by lakes? With a grin forming on my face, I replied playfully. Only when they look like they might be contemplating running away forever. She let out a dry laugh which felt close enough to honesty. That's not far from reality. Then silence enveloped us again as she stirred her coffee with the back of her spoon without saying anything further, until finally speaking again with lowered tones. You have no idea who I am or what I have experienced. Her words struck harder than anticipated. Leaning back, slightly unsure how best to respond, felt necessary. No, I admitted honestly after taking a moment's pause before adding gently, but I'd like to know. She locked eyes with me, then really looked as if trying to determine whether my interest was genuine, or if I'd just be another guy trying to fill an uncomfortable void he couldn't handle. I lost my husband 3 weeks ago. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Everything froze around us while blinking slowly registered what she'd just shared. I stammered out, Rachel, I'm so sorry. She nodded knowingly as though accustomed already hearing those words countless times before. Everyone says they're sorry, I understand. It's just strange discussing it, she continued after taking another breath before elaborating further. He was complicated. Waiting patiently allowed space for more from Rachel as she went on. He had charm when we were out together, a successful man who ran his own small firm downtown, but at home, he was not the person everyone believed him to be. I remained still, not even blinking. There were days that were good, but more frequently, there were days when I couldn't recognize him. The infidelity began early on, accompanied by deceit, yelling, and sometimes even worse than yelling. Her voice remained steady and flat. It was the kind of tone used when all tears have been shed, and one is merely stating facts to those who won't comprehend. I stayed because I loved him and thought that love was meant to be painful. At times, I would clench my jaw as a heavy weight pressed down on my chest. Now he is gone. Everyone keeps urging me to move forward, but I have no idea what that even means. The silence between us had lost its awkwardness. It had become something sacred. She looked up at me with eyes that were glassy, yet strong. You might think I'm insane, she said. I shook my head in response. I believe you're just surviving, which seemed to catch her off guard. And what about you, she asked, attempting to redirect the focus away from herself. What about me? I shrugged. Nothing too dramatic. I work, study at night, help my mom with bills and live with a dog that snores louder than most people I know. She smiled a genuine smile that was more than just polite, small, but real. I like that, she said. Simple. We sat in silence for a bit longer before I walked her to her car. She didn't say much. She simply got in and started the engine. But before shutting the door, she glanced back at me and said, Thanks for not asking too much or too little. I meant it when I replied that I'd like to see her again, no pressure, just if she wanted to. She nodded and said she would think about it before driving away. As I watched her taillights fade down Main Street, one thing became clear. She wasn't a ghost. She was someone still striving to exist. I didn't hear from Rachel for nearly 2 weeks after our coffee at Mike's. Not wanting to intrude, I refrained from calling or texting her. I assumed she needed some space and respected that decision. However, It would be dishonest of me to say that thoughts of her didn't cross my mind every single day, not in a romantic way, but out of concern and curiosity about the burden she carried with her. I found myself wondering if she was eating well or sleeping or even getting out of bed. Then one night just after 10 p.m., as I prepared to wind down for the evening, Tucker had already settled on the couch. I finished up a paper for class, heated some leftovers in the microwave, and was brushing my teeth when a soft knock came at the door, barely audible and almost mistaken for an accident. When I opened the door, there stood Rachel under the porch light with her hands tucked into the pockets of an oversized light blue shirt that was slightly wrinkled. It hung loosely on her frame like a robe. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't just any shirt. It belonged to him, her husband. Neither of us spoke immediately as I stepped aside for her to enter. She walked past me slowly, her eyes scanning the room as if she hadn't been inside anyone else's home in quite some time. After closing the door behind her, she paused in the middle of the room with her arms crossed, as if unsure how to position herself physically. "I'm sorry," she finally said, for arriving so late. "I didn't know where else to go." "You don't need to apologize," I replied gently as she nodded and looked down at the floor while shifting her bare feet on the hardwood surface. "I was lying in bed," she continued softly, while tugging at the fabric of the shirt. "I used to wear this when he was away. He travelled frequently for business or other matters." She half laughed, but without any humour behind it. "I thought wearing it would provide some comfort or closure," she admitted sadly. "But it doesn't. It never has." I remained quiet as she continued speaking. "I came here tonight because while sitting in darkness wearing this damn thing, it hit me. I'm still waiting for him to come back home." Her voice turned bitter as she added how much she despised that feeling, that despite everything he had done wrong, part of her still clung to the notion that he was the one. She turned toward me then. Her eyes were not filled with tears this time, but rather clear and focused as she said softly, "You're not like him." My chest tightened at her words as she continued. "You're kind, you listen, and you don't fill silence with noise just to avoid discomfort." Then came a hesitant admission. "And maybe this is crazy, or too soon, or something I'll regret by morning, but being around you doesn't hurt." Unsure how to respond initially, I slowly walked over and stood beside her instead of saying anything right away. "You're allowed to feel all of that," I said softly. "You're allowed to miss someone who caused you pain. You're allowed to mourn a version of him that never truly existed, and you're allowed not to have all the answers tonight." She looked up at me closely now. I could detect a faint scent of lavender on her skin, while strands of messy hair fell across her face. She appeared like someone who had exhausted all their tears, not empty but raw instead. "I haven't let anyone touch me in over a year," she whispered softly, "not even for a hug." "I'm not sure why I'm sharing this with you," she added quietly. "Because you trust me," I replied barely above a whisper. She nodded again before carefully stepping closer and resting her head against my chest while wrapping my arms around her gently, not possessively or romantically, but simply offering warmth and human kindness instead. She didn't cry or tremble. Instead, we stood there together, breathing in each other's presence until eventually guiding her toward the couch where I provided a blanket-made tea and sat beside her without touching or speaking, just being present together. There were no kisses exchanged, nor discussions about what this meant between us, no music playing, nor candles lit, just a woman wearing her late husband's shirt, sitting next to a man who genuinely cared about her well-being. Before drifting off under the blanket's warmth, Rachel murmured one last thing. "Thank you for not trying to fix me." That night proved restless for me, as I sat up staring at the ceiling while listening intently to the gentle rhythm of her breathing nearby. Not due to my anxiety, but because I recognized for the first time how delicate the process of healing could be and how crucial it was to safeguard it. This wasn't a romantic tale, yet it felt quieter, slower, perhaps even more profound. The following morning, I awoke before dawn. I wanted to avoid moving too quickly, making noise, or disrupting the tranquility that had somehow enveloped my small living room overnight. Rachel was still asleep on the couch, nestled under the blanket I had given her. Her hair was slightly messy, and his shirt was now partially unbuttoned, slipping off her shoulder. Yet there was a gentler expression on her face. Her brow was relaxed unlike before, and her breathing was calm. For once, she appeared not to be battling herself. I quietly brewed coffee, fed Tucker, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. I was meant to complete an essay about internal combustion engines, but my concentration faltered as I kept glancing at her. I couldn't stop recalling what she had said the previous night. "You're not like him." And then, "Thank you for not trying to fix me." I wasn't sure what we were or what she expected from me, if anything at all. But one thing was clear. I wouldn't rush her or attempt to turn her suffering into a project. I simply wanted to be present in whatever way she needed. She stirred awake around 8 o'clock. I noticed her moving beneath the blanket and turned to see her sitting up slowly, rubbing her eyes like a child who had overslept for school. Then she caught my gaze and smiled softly. "Hey," she greeted me gently. "Morning." There was a brief pause before she added with a smile. "Not a big one, not flashy, but real. Do you always let strange women crash on your couch?" "Only those who show up wearing someone else's shirt," I replied. She laughed fully this time, covering her mouth with her hand and shaking her head. "I haven't laughed like that in ages," she admitted. I poured her a cup of coffee and handed it over. She wrapped both hands around the mug as if trying to warm herself from within. "Thanks for last night," she said sincerely, "or for not making it awkward." "It's only awkward if you make it awkward," I teased as she rolled her eyes. "You're such a guy." "I'm a decent guy." "That's rare," she muttered. In the weeks that followed, Rachel began visiting more frequently, not every day or on any set schedule, just occasionally. She would text me asking if I was home or knock on the door without warning. Sometimes she brought food, other times she didn't say much at all, but each visit revealed something. She started reclaiming herself. She changed out of his shirt and began wearing jeans and t-shirts again. She pulled her hair back neatly and put on earrings once more, small changes that carried significance. One day, I found her standing in front of the mirror in my hallway adjusting her necklace. She gazed at herself for quite some time, not out of vanity, but as if trying to reconnect with who she used to be. "I haven't worn this necklace since our first anniversary," she remarked quietly. I didn't respond, I simply observed her. Another time when I returned home from work, I discovered her on the floor with Tucker laughing as he licked her face. "You're spoiling him," I joked. "He deserves it," she replied with a smile. "He doesn't expect anything from me." That struck me deeply. We weren't officially together, we hadn't kissed or defined our relationship, but we were close, closer than many who claim to be in love. There was comfort in our silence and an unspoken understanding that what we were building couldn't be rushed. She gradually opened up about painful experiences, how her husband had cheated for the first time when he sent a text that she initially dismissed as harmless. Then came the second betrayal, and third, along with all the pushing, yelling, apologies, promising it would never happen again. And how she stayed because she believed love sometimes involved pain. "I used to think if only I tried harder, he'd become the man I fell in love with," she shared one evening while we sat on the porch. "But he never did. And now I've come to realize he never was." I looked at her intently. "You're stronger than you realize." She shook her head slightly. "I'm just tired." "That's okay too." Then one evening everything shifted between us while we were sitting on the couch watching an old comedy film. Nothing extraordinary about it, really. She nestled against me with her head resting on my shoulder when I felt her shift slightly before tilting her head up to meet my gaze. "I used to hate silence," she whispered softly. "Now it feels safe. Me too." She studied my face for a moment before leaning in slowly and kissing me gently. It wasn't passionate or hurried, but rather slow and tender, like an unspoken question without punctuation marks. I kissed back lightly and carefully. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us spoke for some time. We didn't need words. That night, instead of leaving, she stayed not just physically but emotionally as well. But emotionally, she allowed herself to be embraced. She permitted herself to relax. I didn't feel like a rescuer. I simply felt fortunate to witness someone making the choice to heal. It has been a year since that evening she arrived at my doorstep wearing her late husband's shirt. I can still recall every detail. The way she stood there, uncertain, as if caught between leaving and staying, the way her voice trembled when she said, "You're not like him." At that moment, I had no idea what would follow. But now I do. Everything transformed when Rachel moved in 6 months ago. It wasn't a grand or dramatic discussion. No boxes, no moving truck, just a few of her belongings at first, books, plants, and a blanket she cherished. Then one day, I returned home to find her toothbrush next to mine. That was it. That marked the move. We didn't discuss the past much anymore, not because we were ignoring it, but because it no longer defined her or us. We created something new together. Some mornings we would wake up early and sip coffee on the porch in silence. Some nights we'd drift off in the middle of a conversation. I began cooking more, trying to impress her with simple dishes like pasta and eggs. She always claimed it tasted better than anything she prepared, even though I knew she was being untruthful. Then one afternoon in late spring, she sat me down. Initially I thought something was wrong. She appeared anxious and restless, her hands fidgeting uncontrollably. "I'm pregnant," she announced. It took me a moment to process what she had said. I blinked, waiting for her to laugh or say it was a joke, but she didn't. She simply gazed at me with that same vulnerable strength I had witnessed the night she first shared her story. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded and replied that she had taken the test 3 times. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked over and enveloped her in my arms as tears streamed down her face, not from fear or sadness, but from relief from all those years of believing her story was already predetermined. That was when I realized she wasn't just healing, she was flourishing. Pregnancy hasn't been straightforward for her. Being older means the doctors label it as advanced maternal age, a term she despises. She has more appointments and tests now. Sometimes fear creeps in for both of us. Yet we confront everything together. The first time we heard our baby's heartbeat, she squeezed my hand so tightly that I lost feeling in it for 5 minutes as we both cried together. "I never thought I'd get another chance at life," she said in the car afterward. "You didn't get another chance?" I replied. "You created one." That made her smile. Now we are nearing the finish line, just a few weeks remain until our baby arrives. Last night I completed assembling the crib. It took me far longer than it should have since I'm skilled with engines but not with tiny screws and soft wood. However, when I saw it standing in the corner of our small second bedroom, it felt real, as if we were no longer just dreaming about this future together. Rachel's belly is now round. She moves more slowly and laughs often while taking frequent naps. Sometimes I catch her standing in the nursery just gazing at the mobile above the crib with her fingers gently resting on her stomach. One night not long ago, I found her there again in that same position. I walked in and stood beside her without saying anything as she whispered softly that she never thought she'd experience this kind of peace again. Wrapping my arm around her shoulder, I told her that she deserved it. She turned toward me and placed her hand on my cheek, saying softly that I had given it to her. Shaking my head gently, I replied that it was all because of her letting me in, that was entirely on her part. After a long pause filled with silence, she said something I'll always remember. "I don't think about him anymore," she whispered softly, "not like before. When he comes to mind now, it's merely shadows. He doesn't reside here, not in this house, or this life anymore." She kissed me not like our first kiss, which was hesitant and unsure, but this one felt solid and full of depth, like roots burrowing deep into the earth. As we lay down that night, curled up together with our baby gently kicking between us, it dawned on me that this isn't merely an end to her previous story, it's the start of ours, together. She is no longer just the woman by the lake or the widow wearing his shirt, the shadow of someone else's sorrow. She is Rachel, my partner and soon-to-be mother of our child. And I'm Daniel, a kid from a small town who once believed he had nothing to give until he offered what mattered most: presents. Our love didn't blossom like in movies. Instead, we constructed it brick by brick, day by day. Now when people inquire about how we met, Rachel simply smiles and says, "I showed up wearing my late husband's shirt, and he helped me take it off.